Erich Ludendorff, the general who defied Germany's enemies. Imagine a man with the strategic mind of a chess grandmaster, the ambition of a conqueror, and the determination of a bulldog. That man is Erich Ludendorff, Germany's military mastermind during World War I. He wasn't just another general. He was the guy who looked at impossible odds and said, "Let's make it happen. But hold your horses before you think. We're diving into a dry history lesson. Think again." Ludendorff's life was anything but boring. From daring military campaigns to wild political escapades, this guy's story has more twists and turns than a roller coaster at Oktoberfest. Get ready to explore the life of Erich Ludendorff, the general who defied Germany's enemies and took on the world with a strategy as sharp as his mustache. Trust me, this is one history lesson you won't want to sleep through. Erich Ludendorff didn't just stumble into greatness, he was practically born with a blueprint in hand. Picture this. It's 1865 in Prussia, and little Erich is already outsmarting his siblings in games of strategy. You know, the usual childhood hobbies: playing with toy soldiers, plotting world domination. Raised with a strict Prussian upbringing, Ludendorff learned early on that there were two ways to do things: the right way and his way. And let's just say, his way usually involved a lot of discipline and a dash of brilliance. As a young cadet, Ludendorff didn't waste any time making a name for himself. He quickly rose through the ranks, impressing his superiors with a sharp mind and an even sharper uniform. While other cadets were busy shining their boots, Ludendorff was busy plotting his next career move. Talk about a guy who knew how to get ahead. Ludendorff's rise through the military ranks was anything but slow and steady. No, this guy was on the express elevator to the top floor. By the time most officers were still learning the ropes, Ludendorff was already tying them into knots, figuratively, of course. His secret: a combination of brains, brawn, and a refusal to take no for an answer. If there was a challenge, Ludendorff didn't just overcome it, he bulldozed through it with the determination of a rhino on a mission. By the time World War I was on the horizon, Ludendorff was more than ready to take the reins. And when he did, well, let's just say the world was in for quite a show. When World War I erupted, Erich Ludendorff wasn't just another cog in the military machine, he was the engine driving it forward. With a mind sharper than a bayonet and a knack for outmaneuvering his enemies, Ludendorff quickly became the mastermind behind Germany's war strategies. If war is like chess, then Ludendorff was the grandmaster who always thought 3 moves ahead. He turned the battlefield into his personal chessboard, where every piece, every soldier was part of a bigger plan. And let's be real, this guy was playing for D-chess while everyone else was trying to figure out how to castle. The Schlieffen Plan was Germany's big play and ambitious strategy to knock France out of the war before turning east to Russia. It was a bold move, but like any good strategist, Ludendorff couldn't resist adding his own twist. While others saw it as a straightforward plan, Ludendorff saw opportunities for innovation. Why go around enemy defenses when you can go through them? And so, with a few tweaks here and there, Ludendorff transformed the plan into something uniquely his own. Under his command, the German forces launched rapid and aggressive attacks that caught their enemies off guard. It was like watching a cat play with a mouse, except this cat had tanks, artillery, and a very clear sense of direction. Ludendorff wasn't just a planner, he was a man of action. His strategies led to some of Germany's most significant victories during the war, starting with the Battle of Liege, where he showed the world that speed and surprise were his signature moves. Then came the Battle of Tannenberg, a triumph that cemented Ludendorff's reputation as a military genius. While his enemies were busy scratching their heads, Ludendorff was busy encircling and annihilating an entire Russian army. Talk about turning the tables. With each victory, Ludendorff's legend grew. He wasn't just leading Germany's armies. He was redefining what it meant to wage modern warfare. And with each success, he became more convinced that he was unstoppable until, of course, the war started to take its toll. By 1918, the Great War had dragged on for years, and everyone was feeling the strain except maybe Erich Ludendorff. With Germany's resources dwindling and morale sinking, Ludendorff decided it was time to go all in. Enter the Spring Offensive, his bold gamble to end the war on Germany's terms. It was a do-or-die moment, and Ludendorff wasn't the type to go quietly. He unleashed a series of aggressive assaults, aiming to break the stalemate and deliver a knockout punch to the Allies. It was a high-stakes game, and Ludendorff was ready to bet the farm. At first, Ludendorff's gamble seemed to be paying off. The Spring Offensive caught the Allies off guard, and German forces surged forward like a tidal wave. It was as if Ludendorff had found the secret recipe for victory, and he was serving it up hot and fast. The offensive was a master class in shock and awe. Ludendorff's troops broke through enemy lines with the precision of a surgeon, cutting deep into Allied territory. For a moment, it looked like the tide of war had finally turned in Germany's favor. But as the saying goes, what goes up must come down, and that's exactly what happened. The initial success of the Spring Offensive began to stall. Ludendorff's forces were running on fumes, and the Allies were rallying with renewed determination. It was like running a marathon at a sprint eventually. You're going to hit the wall. And when the German troops did, it wasn't pretty. Supplies dwindled, morale plummeted, and the once unstoppable offensive started to falter. By the summer of 1918, it was clear that Ludendorff's bold gamble hadn't paid off. The Spring Offensive, once full of promise, had drained Germany's resources and left its armies overextended. The Allies, meanwhile, were gaining strength and pushing back harder than ever. Ludendorff, always the fighter, refused to give up. But even he had to face the harsh reality. The war was slipping out of his control. It was a bitter pill to swallow for a man who had once seemed unstoppable. In the end, the Spring Offensive was Ludendorff's last great gamble. A gamble that, despite its initial success, ultimately came up short. And for Ludendorff, the consequences would be felt long after the guns fell silent. As the war dragged on and the tides turned against Germany, Erich Ludendorff found himself in uncharted territory. The man who had once been hailed as a military genius was now facing the harsh reality of defeat, and it wasn't just the battlefield where he was losing ground. When things go wrong, someone's got to take the fall, and in post-war Germany, all eyes turned to Ludendorff. Once the golden boy of the German military, he was now being painted as the scapegoat for the country's woes. Politicians, eager to save their own skins, were quick to point fingers. Ludendorff, never one to back down from a fight, tried to push back, but the writing was on the wall. The German people were tired, hungry, and angry, and they needed someone to blame. The once mighty general was now being seen as the architect of disaster. As the situation in Germany spiraled out of control, even the Kaiser, once Ludendorff's staunch ally, began to waver. The pressure was mounting, and something had to give. In November 1918, the unthinkable happened. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated the throne, signaling the end of an era. With the Kaiser gone and the monarchy collapsing, Ludendorff knew his time was up. On October 26, 1918, he was forced to resign from his position as first quartermaster general. It was a humiliating end for a man who had once held Germany's fate in his hands. Once a towering figure in the German military, Ludendorff now found himself out of power and out of favor. The general who had orchestrated some of Germany's greatest victories was now retreating into the shadows, with his legacy hanging in the balance. Erich Ludendorff's story didn't end with the war, far from it. After his fall from grace, the once mighty general found himself adrift in a nation that was struggling to find its footing. But if you thought Ludendorff would quietly fade into obscurity, think again. This was a man with more lives than a cat, and his post-war years were anything but dull. Ludendorff didn't just retire to a quiet life in the countryside. No, he plunged headfirst into the turbulent world of Weimar politics. Disillusioned with the new German government, Ludendorff became a vocal critic of the Weimar Republic, aligning himself with various right-wing extremist groups. He even threw his lot in with a young, up-and-coming politician by the name of Adolf Hitler. That's right, Ludendorff was one of the key figures in the infamous beer hall putsch of 1923, an attempted coup that, to put it mildly, didn't exactly go according to plan. After the failure of the putsch, Ludendorff's political career took a nosedive. But instead of fading away, he took a turn for the eccentric. Ludendorff became obsessed with mysticism, conspiracy theories, and the idea that Germany's defeat in World War I was part of a larger, sinister plot. His later writings were, well, let's just say they weren't exactly bestsellers. Ludendorff's theories became more and more outlandish, and even his former allies began to distance themselves from him. By the time the Nazis came to power, Ludendorff was largely sidelined, viewed as too extreme, even by their standards. Erich Ludendorff remains a controversial figure in history, a man of great talent and deep flaws. His military genius is undeniable, but his later years cast a long shadow over his legacy. Some remember him as the architect of Germany's early successes in World War I, while others see him as a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition and bitterness go unchecked. In the end, Ludendorff's life was a roller coaster of triumphs and tragedies, victories and defeats. He was a man who defied Germany's enemies, but in the process became his own worst enemy. And that, perhaps, is the most enduring lesson of Erich Ludendorff's remarkable and tumultuous life.